Welcome to the Why on Earth Community Podcast. Today we are visiting with Ryan Zinn, Regenerative Projects Manager at Dr. Bronner's. Hey Ryan.
Hey there, how's it going?
Good, how you doing?
Not so bad. Just sort of adjusting to this new reality here in the days and times of coronavirus for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're going to have a lot to talk about in terms of coronavirus. Obviously, you're in the soap business. We've got supply chain issues. All of this relates also to the sustainability and regeneration work that you're doing all around the planet. So I'm really looking forward to our discussion today.
Yeah, I'm excited. We're in a very dynamic and changing world, and it's funny to think sometimes how a soap company could be really caught up in the middle of it. So I'm excited about our conversation, Aaron.
Great. Well, let me give our audience a bit of a background on you. Ryan Zinn supports Dr. Bronner's international organic and fair trade supply chains in Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. Ryan has worked the last 20 years with small-scale farmer organizations to develop agroecological strategies that are just and resilient. Ryan also supports nonprofit partners like the Fair Trade Advocacy Organization, Fair World Project, and the small farmer crowdfunding platform called Grow Ahead. And we're going to be mentioning a number of different resources and some videos through our conversation, and we'll have links to all those in the show notes for folks to reference. So Ryan, yeah, here we are, and we're dealing with COVID-19. You're in California, you're at home, your kids are also at home. Maybe just as a place to start, just because we're all one way or another in this experience together. How's your day been today? And what's going on in your world right now with coronavirus?
Yeah, it's a little wild. I usually start my day pretty early, mostly because most of our partners are either in Asia or Africa. And so that gives me an opportunity to either, if I need to touch base with them. And I tell you what, if it wasn't for Zoom and Skype, we'd be in a whole lot of trouble these days, since all of our travel to all of our partner projects has been really slowed down. So I am just hunkering down for the time being. I've got my two children here at home. I've got a teenager and a tweenager. And then I've got my wife, who is a pediatric nurse, who's also wrapping up her master's in nurse practitioner at UCLA. So everybody's gone virtual, which has been a big, a change for them to kind of think through their academic life now online. And yeah, we're just trying to kind of figure it all out now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we know for certain that what's happening right now is definitely having an impact on the soap companies. And I'm really curious to ask, I'm assuming that demand has just skyrocketed for the Dr. Bronner's products. What does that look like in the immediate term, but also what does that mean over the coming weeks and months in terms of supply chain procurement and, how resilient are those supplies coming from all around the world?
That's a great question, Aaron. So I think, the good news is that, we've been deemed by the state of California and the county of San Diego as a quote unquote essential business. Certainly, soap and hand sanitizer will be in high demand for the foreseeable future. And as such, all our sales have been really booming, which is great on the one hand. And then, I form part of a really small team, and our job really is to work with our partners on the ground that produce all of our raw materials and sort of build out our supply chain. So that includes everything from like coconut oil and palm oil, all the way to our essential oils like mint oil. And right now, our biggest challenge is working with farmers on the ground, since many of the countries or regions have actually been facing some sort of variation of either full quarantine or shutdown or limited operation. And, that's, kind of, I think, something that is often overlooked. In fact, is like, you have farmers on the front end of this. We work with 10,000 small farmers. Many of them are, working in relatively impoverished communities. And our goal is to not only provide them with, a sustained, fair trading relationship with Dr. Bronner's, but make sure that they're thriving as well. And so if they are more or less quarantined to their farm or to their home, then like many other food services here in the United States, they don't have an income, they can't put food on the table. And so not only is it important for our bottom line, but we're really committed to their livelihoods as well. So, just to give you an example, hand sanitizer, which is now, flying off the shelves everywhere. We work with small scale farmers in Paraguay and Ecuador, and our farmers, partners in Ecuador, they're just stuck at home because they have a full-on 15-day quarantine. So they won't actually be able to get their product to port and ship to us. So we're trying to be as creative as possible. Certainly, we don't want to abandon our partners in a time of need and go with another sort of cheaper alternative or quicker alternative. But we also need to make sure that we can continue to make soap and hand sanitizer and the rest of our products. So I think on top of the day-to-day work that we do, which has its own challenges, certainly overlaying COVID-19 on top of it provides another wrinkle that we have to kind of think through and be pretty creative.
Absolutely. Well, I know that you and the team at Dr. Bronner's are extraordinarily creative and really on the forefront, the cutting edge of the regenerative and the sustainable movements worldwide. And I'm so excited to ask you about the ways in which you guys are supporting regenerative agricultural practices around the world. And what does that mean? I know a lot of our audience is familiar with the term regenerative. Some of our audience works in the regenerative realm, but of course we also have a lot of folks who are just getting acquainted with the term and what it means, and clearly this is going to become a very, very important action item for us all around the planet, and you guys are leading the way. So regenerative agriculture, what is it, and what are you guys doing?
Well, I mean, I think for us, our sort of journey towards this space in 2020 kind of starts about 15 years ago. When the Bronner family made this commitment to convert and transfer all of our raw materials, our coconut oil, for example, over to organic sources, what we quickly realized is that without having a lot of, insight into your supply chains, it's really hard to tell if the integrity is there for organic. Certainly, we didn't know about the working conditions, whether farmers were paid fairly. And so as a result, we were, more or less forced to set up our own supply chains. So back about 15 years ago, we set up our first supply chain in Sri Lanka to produce coconut oil, which is our number one ingredient in most of our soaps. And as a result, we did that not only to have organic integrity so that we can ensure that the consumer has a product free from pesticides and is grown sustainably. But certainly we also wanted to produce under fair trade conditions as well. So that means that farmers are paid fair prices, they're paid promptly. We're not going to abandon them if they face a drought or COVID-19 or what have you. And so we wanted to make sure that that was really our foundation. And over time, what we realized is that we really wanted to take it further. And so we've kind of been approaching this idea of regenerative organic agriculture as a way to not only ensure that we have a stable supply chain for ourselves, for sure, but really, I think the big thing is thinking it through the lens of climate change. So what we know is that climate change has already been having a big impact on farmers around the world, whether they call it climate change or something else. But really, for the past 10 or 20 years, we've seen increases of, crop loss, more pest and disease problems for farmers. And this is leading to all sorts of things, migration to the cities, losing land, those types of things. And so our goal is to really improve our practices on the ground under this sort of banner of regenerative organic. And really what that means is a couple of different things just in terms of general principles. One, in nature has no monoculture. So really our focus is to diversify as much as we can with our small farmer partners. And that means supporting them to diversify into other crops and other systems that, quite frankly, we may never actually use in our own supply chains to make soap. So for example, in Ghana and West Africa, where we see a number of our farmers actually grow cocoa to make chocolate, there it's a very, very heavily pesticide dependent crop where they just sprayed fungicide left and right just because of the climatic conditions and the practices. And so our goal is to get those farmers off that pesticide treadmill, improve their practices, which will not only improve their resiliency and improve their food security, but also provides them additional income. While we are able to provide fair prices for the products that we buy, the rest of the marketplace, quite frankly, is just not fair. And so we want to make sure that we can find fair prices for virtually everything that farmers produce, whether that is sold and distributed in local markets, or we find them premium buyers in the United States or in Europe.
Well, that's tremendous. You guys are going well above and beyond your own direct needs and interests with these farmers. That's really remarkable.
Yeah, for us, it's been a slow process. When you start to convert farmers from, these long, sort of seeded, experience of using chemicals to farm, it's a long sort of transitional process. And so what we want to do is accompany farmers during that process, but also provide them incentives so that they can sort of, weather the changes that they are facing on the ground themselves. Quite frankly, depending on what you grow, sometimes organic may have higher labor costs, for example, or require you to spend more time out in your field. So we want to make sure that as much as possible, really the true cost of what it takes to produce a regenerative and fair product is reflected in our relationship with farmers.
It's interesting. I've spoken with a number of farmers over the years about the often the increased labor requirements associated with organic practices. But on the other hand, there's an offset coming from no longer needing to buy these expensive chemical inputs. And I'm curious, with these farmers you've worked with in general, how does their economic performance trend over time as they convert to organic and then build in a regenerative framework?
I would say it really varies from place to place. Some places you have quite a bit more labor, depending on the cropping, system. So for example, all of the mint that we use or mint oil we use in our, most famous peppermint soap comes from Uttar Pradesh in India, where they grow mint to make into essential oils, but they have other rotations as well, thing from like wheat to paddy rice and those types of things. And so really our goal is to figure out a way to support them during that transition period, where in some cases their costs may go up because of labor, for example, or their yields may go down. But our experience is once you get over the hump, that transitional period where you actually certified organic, you can receive that organic premium, then, things begin to balance out quite a bit better in the favor of farmers. Really kind of our goal, once we go through this transition period, that's both required for the marketplace, but also just for soil to kind of like come back to life again and to be able to produce healthily, then you have many, many more options. And so after that sort of investment of time, and if you're growing, tree crops, there's quite a bit of investment in terms of seedlings, for example. We want to make sure that farmers have sort of a stable, diversified sort of farm economy that can sort of, weather the changing either climatic conditions or even the market conditions.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Well, speaking of the peppermint Dr. Bronner soap, I've got some of that in my bathroom, so I'm a daily user and a big fan. Well, I'm wondering, can you help connect the dots a little more and paint more of a picture for folks? What is the connection between regenerative agriculture, soil, and climate crisis?
Sure. Okay. So that's a really good question, Aaron. One of the things that we often think about when we think about climate change, that either it's, sort of exhaust coming out of cars' tailpipes, or, factories spewing contaminants into the atmosphere, sort of on the, emissions end of things. Or we also think of things like solar panels, for example, as a way to kind of mitigate against some of the bigger and broader kind of climate change challenges. What most folks may not realize is that agriculture or industrialized agriculture, in fact, is one of the larger, sources of greenhouse gases. So everything from, mechanized agriculture using big combines and tractors, to the production of food, for example, and fertilizers, pesticides. But even just the simple fact of turning over soil and like plowing it very heavily actually releases carbon stored in that soil into the atmosphere. And so this sort of quote unquote, industrial agricultural experience we've been doing now for the last 60 or 70 years has actually created quite a bit of greenhouse gas emissions, that have been going up into the atmosphere. So we see a lot of potential for regenerative agriculture to not only stop those emissions, but actually sort of restore this carbon cycle, which basically means that soil can act as a carbon sink, suck all that CO2 out of the atmosphere, put it into the soil, which is not only beneficial for the climate, but it's also really, really important for plants in healthy soil. All of that turns into actual sort of nutrients to have a very healthy soil profile. And so that's been pretty much our goal in terms of how we've been approaching farming at all of our projects. Really, it's this really combination is to implement practices that sequester carbon where appropriate, but also build up our soil health. And so that's one of the things that is probably, a very simple concept to do, but it's one thing that really provides a lot of stability for farmers. They're able to actually absorb those climate shocks, whether it's drought, not enough rain, too much rain, high temperatures, those types of things. But it also acts as a way for us to sort of turn back on some of the damage we've been doing through climate change. So really our kind of focus here is to see agriculture done regeneratively and organically as a way for us to address multiple things at once. Turn back climate change, have farmers feed their local communities, and then be able to produce a product like Dr. Bronner's soap that's done in a way that's fairly and as cleanly as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that here at the Y on Earth community, obviously, we really emphasize for folks is the critical role that each of us as individuals plays as a consumer with our purchasing decisions, where we're directing our consumer demand signals. And I'm wondering, can you speak to a bit about the dynamics that you see out in the marketplace? And of course, it's a segue into the regenerative organic certification that I know we're all really, really excited about. But what do you see out there in the marketplace in terms of the importance of the consumer demand signals?
Well, one thing I think which has been really exciting for me is that one, I think consumers, ethical consumers are seeing that they want to go quote unquote above and beyond organic and maybe even fair trade. And they're seeing climate change as one of the big existential threats that it is, not only to their communities, but to the foods that they like. You know, I always tell folks, if you really want to get freaked out, you know, above and beyond COVID-19, just type in your favorite food into Google and climate change, whether it's chocolate, coffee, wine, bread. There's been a huge number of sort of like, you know, evidences and impacts that we're seeing throughout different supply chains. And so I think consumers are becoming increasingly savvy about that. And so as a result of all the fine work that's been done by, you know, farmers organizations and other nonprofits and NGOs, I think consumers are really looking to make sure that consumer dollar that they're spending really goes to those products that reflect their values. It's not just enough to be organic or just enough to be fair trade. They want to basically look at the suite of values altogether in one product. And so I think that, of course, is actually very, very encouraging. It means that we've got this sort of emerging consumer base that's really willing to put their money where their mouth is, which I think is really positive. On the other hand, what you have now in the marketplace, other than, you know, claims like organic, for example, which is regulated at the federal level, you're seeing all sorts of claims in the marketplace that it's regenerative this or free range that, and none of these claims are in fact regulated or have any basically, you know, sort of assurance behind them. And so one of the things that we did at Dr. Bronner's was look to connect with other like-minded organizations and companies to create a standard and process that really put a whole lot of sort of like force and validity behind the claims. And so we partnered with the Rodale Institute out of Pennsylvania, Patagonia, and a number of other NGOs and farmers organizations to create a draft or pilot standard called the Regenerative Organic Certification, or ROC standard. And so from there, our goal was really to be able to try to bring together all of our important values. So organic certainly was there, fairness, for farmers and farm workers was certainly front and center. And then also looking at soil health and animal welfare. You know, one of the things that we look at is like when we look at a farm or a product, we want to make sure that all those values are there. Well, it's really tough for a consumer to try to figure that out all on their own. Heck, I'm, you know, in this business, and sometimes it's also tough for me when I go to the supermarket to figure out if the claims that a product they're making are in fact real or just greenwashing. So our goal was to be able to create a standard that reflects our values and then can be verified, which means that a third party will go out and certify to it. And then the consumer can know that, hey, look, all of my values are encapsulated in this product.
Yeah, that's so powerful. Well, we're really excited about the regenerative organic certification, and the Y on Earth community, I know, is going to be doing a whole lot in the coming months to help build awareness, educate, and mobilize around that out in the marketplace. And you know, it makes me think also about a lot of the other ways in which we're all engaged in cultivating a more regenerative oriented culture. And I know you have some thoughts about what living regeneratively means in addition to whatever soap we might choose to buy. What are some of those?
Well, I tell you what, I mean, it's actually, you know, maybe the one silver lining of the COVID-19 crisis is that, you know, it's really kind of forced our hand to do two things. I think one is to look like at our own home. I saw a couple of stats really in the last maybe 10 days where, the sales of organic seeds have just gone through the roof. And so I see that as a really positive step. Even if it's a really small, couple of containers of herbs you have on your porch or your balcony or, on your windowsill, or you convert your entire front lawn to a home garden. I think those are really powerful connections because I think on multiple levels. One, if we can actually actively participate in the growing of our own food, even if it's relatively small or symbolic, I think there's just a very clear connection that you would see with the rest of the food that you buy. You have a greater appreciation that all of the work that farmers and farm workers go through and how hard it is and what are the challenges it is to actually get fair and organic food to your front door, to your supermarkets. I think that's really important. And the other thing that I think is exciting for me to see is that there's more and more examples of collaboration happening right now, which I think is really, really critical. I don't think any of us can go it alone. Doesn't matter how much money we have or how much space we have to grow whatever we have. I think being able to collaborate and depend upon your neighbors, I think is really, really critical. So I've seen some really great examples just in the last week of people working together, either to help their neighbor go get, their medicine at the pharmacy, for example. Everybody came together and shared their resources on my street for those folks that didn't get any toilet paper because somebody was hoarding them. And so it was a great way for us to be able to say, how can we collaborate in a way and sort of have that mutual aid network within your own community. I think that's really, really critical. So to me, it's a couple of things. One, it's making sure those relationships locally within your street or your neighborhood are really, really strong. And then second, it's also just basically getting your hands dirty and going out there and kind of growing what you can. Because I think that sort of connection to the earth is so much more tangible when you can do it yourself, as opposed to thinking about it, theoretically about some farmer, far away from you, kind of doing their own thing and you have no real connection to them. So those are, for me, I think are probably the two sort of biggest and most exciting things I've seen. And then I should just add, one of the things that we've been really focusing on is I think it's great to buy organically and regeneratively as much as you can, but we need to take all of that energy and then put it into making good public policy so that way we can support farmers to transition regeneratively as well. So there's a lot of great discussions happening right now to make sure that farmers are supported as they transition to regenerative practices, whether that's training through the USDA. One of the things that we think has got a lot of potential is for like school districts and hospitals to have regenerative purchasing policies so that all of the produce and the food that they get comes from regenerative sources. That would be one solid way to support those farmers make that transition. Because sometimes the marketplace isn't so kind to farmers. And so we want to make sure that they've got good, long-term, stable contracts so that they can actually make those investments in those regenerative practices.
Yeah, obviously a lot of different ways we can all help support these efforts. And I think it's becoming with COVID-19 increasingly clear to us how vulnerable some of the food supply chains can be and how much we truly depend on the farmers, the folks growing the food. And, when I was writing the book, Why on Earth, a few years ago, I talked about 3 different ways we can think about how we're procuring our food: grow, know, and show for shorthand. So grow some of your own, know some farmers in the vicinity from whom you can source things, and then show with those things we are buying at the store or through e-commerce, through third-party certification, show that those food and beverage products are coming to us with good treatment of people, good treatment of soil, good treatment of water. So the grow, know, show framework seems to hold up, I would say, even more robustly in the context of what we're all experiencing right now with coronavirus.
Oh, 100%. And I think this is it's a great opportunity, but it's going to be a very challenging time for small farmers all over. Quite frankly, if they don't have a couple of months of, just cash flow to be able to weather sort of these challenges, it's going to be really challenging. So I think really the big thing that I've been seeing in sort of my community is figuring out how to support either small and independent businesses or farmers, or like you said, using sort of those e-commerce options if those products aren't quite available in your local community. I think that's super critical to be able to support them during this tough time, because to be honest, what I worry is that only sort of those big sort of corporate industrial farms and, you know, supermarkets, they're going to weather this just fine. It's the folks that we really rely on for those regenerative, you know, products to be able to really weather this as well. And the only way they're going to do that is if that we can support them in this process. So like you say, knowing your farmers and knowing who you're purchasing your food from is absolutely critical.
Absolutely. And that whole mechanism that we call community supported agriculture, the CSA model, is a perfect way right now to support farmers, because essentially here in the springtime, we pay them for this year's production, and it gives them the upfront cash they need to work over these coming months as we get our weekly shares of produce and sometimes other products. Some have eggs, some do other things as well. So to the extent that we can in our communities sort of double down on our community supported agriculture purchasing, I think that's another way we can really help support a lot of these small farmers in particular.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I to be honest with you, I love, you know, I've been seeing a couple of different resources where people can sort of support either local stuff, or there's, you know, since I work a lot in kind of the international supply chains like coffee and what have you, you know, being able to provide, you know, work with roasters who are actually committed to their supply chains, I think is really, really critical as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I got to give a shout out to Equal Exchange, one of the cooperative global networks doing coffee, tea, chocolate. They're doing a lot of great work as well. So shout out to those guys. They've supported some of our Why on Earth work over the months. And maybe I'll take that opportunity to thank some of our sponsors making this podcast series possible and making all of our community mobilization work possible. And these include the Lidge Family Foundation, Purium, Earth Coast Productions, and Waylay Waters. With Waylay Waters, it's a social enterprise, and all of their proceeds support the Y on Earth community. And you can actually join the monthly giving program with Waylay Waters and receive some of the CBD aromatherapy soaking salts, great for your at-home self-care in the context of coronavirus. You can go to wyonearth.org/waylay-waters, that's WELE-waters, to sign up. And of course, want to also mention drbronner.com. You'll note in the URL, it's drbronner.com. And want to also give a big shout out to all the folks in the Y on Earth community who have joined our monthly giving program to support all of this work. In the context of what's happening with coronavirus, we're accelerating a number of resources for folks, resources for permaculture, gardening at home in your neighborhood. We're working on neighborhood resiliency and sustainability handbook and video guides, and actually are excited to be talking with Dr. Bronners about collaborating on some of this. We're collaborating with the Rodale Institute on these efforts as well. And so stay tuned as Y on Earth is helping to make available a number of resources in all of the context of us mobilizing our gardens and our sustainability practices in our own homes and yards and neighborhoods. And I know that, Ryan, you've provided us with a number of links of resources that you have to offer, and we'll have all these in the show notes. And I wanted to just walk through them. The first one on the list that you provided is the Small Scale Farmers Cool Planet video. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so this was a video we did, 5 years ago now, just as people started to begin to make these connections between farming and climate change, and then really the impact that regenerative organic agriculture can have. And so really our goal was to talk a little bit about sort of the big picture, talk about some of the problems associated with chemical industrial agriculture, but really focus in on sort of this, what we call small scale farmer solution. And that basically means that, you know, despite the millions and millions and millions of acres of monocrops grown out there of corn and soy or cotton and what have you, it's really small farmers the world over that are actually feeding their communities. So one of the most kind of interesting stats that we've come across is that, you know, small farmers feed the majority of the world's population just on a quarter of the farmland. So this goes to show you that we can really focus in on having a very healthy and regenerative food supply, is so long as we are able to support small farmers. And so we highlight a number of good brands that are doing great things by partnering with small farmers, and then putting that within the context of climate change. So we did that right at around 2015 climate mobilization in New York City, and sort of leading up into the Paris climate talk. So still a lot of work to be done for sure, but at least it gives a good frame to think about both the food supply, small farmers, and climate change.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I encourage folks to check out that video. And then you have another video called Journey to Probabilmente. I know I'm not saying that exactly correctly. I know you'll say it, but this is another video that you've shared with us. Tell us about that one.
Yeah, so last year we had our CEO, or our Cosmic Engagement Officer, David Bronner, and our team visited our local partners in Uttar Pradesh, India. And they run Pavitrament, which is our mint oil supplier. And so the video is great because it gives you sort of an up close and personal experience of some of the realities facing the small farmers with which we work in. And so in India, we work with about 2,000 small farmers. They have anywhere between half an acre to maybe an acre or 2 acres that not only support their family, but also grow mint and things like that. So it's a good example of how we like to sort of showcase the work that's being done with our partners and our projects, by also sharing some of the voices of the farmers and community members themselves. So if you want a great snapshot into a day in the life of some farmers in Uttar Pradesh, India, and sort of our relationship with them, this is a great video.
That's great. I can't help but make mention that David Bronner, your chief Cosmic Engagement Officer, CEO, was on our podcast several weeks ago. And so if folks want to check out that episode, you can find that at the whyonearth.org/community-podcast page. And it was such a fun conversation. And I imagine he's got to be just a wonderful guy to work with his passion and his various interests. It was a real joy interviewing him.
Yeah, no, I have to say the Bronner family from top to bottom are just the most committed people I've ever, worked with. And to be honest with you, my background is more in like rural development internationally. And I was always very skeptical of working in the private sector, but I would say Dr. Bronner's is one of the few companies I would ever consider working for. So I'm very, very grateful to be able to work with a great team.
That's really beautiful to hear. Before we continue on this list of resources you've provided, I want to also be sure to mention, because I forgot to earlier when giving shout outs to supporters, etc. On the whyonearth.org site, we also have a few resources specifically for gardening. One is called the Community Mobilization Kit, and it includes some biodynamic soil activator that you can use in your garden, and actually in your neighborhood. If you want to, you can share this with your neighbors. It also includes our soil stewardship handbook and some video resources around the soil building that's so important to growing good, healthy, nutrient-dense food and medicinal herbs. We also have the garden bundle kit that we put together for you that has some similar resources and some biochar from one of our biochar partners. So just wanted to make sure that folks know about that. Now soon we're also launching a very exciting bath bomb for gardens, basically a biodynamic soil activator prep wrapped in magnesium sulfate, like a bath bomb that you dissolve into water before spraying it around your garden and your yard. So that's coming. That's going to be a lot of fun for everybody. So just wanted to be sure to mention all that. And on that note, I guess we're going to segue to the Regenerative Organic Alliance, which is regenorganic.org. And Ryan, you already mentioned them, but just tell us a little more about what information we'll find when we go to that resource.
Yeah, 100%. So the Regenerative Organic Alliance is an organization that was co-founded by Patagonia, Dr. Bronner's, Rodale Institute, and a number of other nonprofits and farmers and businesses. And really the goal here was to provide a home for this regenerative organic certification process. So folks that go to that website will get a chance to take a look at all of the draft standard of basically what we're looking at in terms of how we define regenerative organic, some updated information on the pilots. So anytime you kind of create a new program or a new standard, you actually want to go ahead and test it out. And so over the last year or so, we've been piloting out the standard actually at 3 of our projects in Ghana, Sri Lanka, and in India, but with other partners as well, both in North America and abroad. And right now we're in the process of actually going through all of the feedback on the experience from the farmers and the businesses that participated. And as a result of that process, the standard itself will then become public consumption to any company or farm that would like to actually be certified against it. And so people get a chance to see who the pilot participants were, what the standard language looks like, and then some of the more up-to-date information in terms of where we'll be presenting and things like that.
I'm curious, will it be sort of like a pass-fail, either you're certified or you're not, or does it have tiers and scoring and sort of different levels of accomplishment?
Yes, that's a great question, Aaron. So, one of the things that we've realized is that, starting from scratch, it's really hard to get to regenerative. It's sometimes a long process and it can be expensive. So what we wanted to do was to provide a pathway for farmers and ranchers to have more or less continuous improvement and sort of clear benchmarks, so that there's an actual incentives, and then they get recognized and actually can charge a premium. So the way that the standard was set up is that right now there's 3 tiers: bronze, silver, and gold. And so those tiers basically reflect the level to which the brand or the farm or ranch has actually gone to ensure not only soil health, but fair trade practices, as well as animal welfare. And so what we wanted to do is provide a clear pathway for farmers, but also realizing that, USDA organic is really the sort of entry point. We wanted to make sure that this standard built on organic, and that wasn't really a distraction or take anything away from it. So that is one thing that is super clear as far as the pass-fail part of things. Certainly, USDA organic is your first sort of barrier entry, and then from there, there's a pathway for folks to continually build upon their practices and be recognized by the label.
Okay, so we know that regardless of the tiers, if we're getting something that's certified regenerative organic, it will not have these poisonous, toxic chemicals that we would otherwise find in conventional agriculture.
Indeed. So just to give you an example, you would have as your sort of entry point for any certified entity within the regenerative organic system, but it also includes things like child labor, for example, or forced labor, or sort of minimal requirements on sort of soil health practices. So what we wanted to do is we realized that there's quite a bit of investment required by farmers. There's some training that's required as well, and they had to build up their own supply chain. So one of the things that we realized that is very important, especially in our partnership with the Rodale Institute, is that one way you can ensure that you can reduce your your fertilizer costs, for example, and your input costs, for example, which is like pesticides, is by improving your rotation. So instead of just growing corn and soy year after year, the more diverse rotations farmers can use, including cover crops, can in fact help build up their soil health, but also reduce their costs. But to be able to do that requires some infrastructure, some training, some collaboration perhaps with their neighbors. So we wanted to build in basically a ladder to allow for farmers to be able to build up to that and then be recognized in the marketplace.
Beautiful, yeah. And you just mentioned Rodale. There at rodaleinstitute.org. We recently recorded an interview with CEO Jeff Moyer on a lot of this regenerative work. They've been around, 70 years or something like that, really leading the way from a scientific research standpoint on organic agricultural practices. Rodale, from our vantage point into the ecosystem of the organizations that are really leading the way, Rodale, like you guys, is right at the heart of all of this.
Yeah, we've been inspired by the work done at Rodale over the years. I remember, 20 plus years ago in university reading some of their research that was done. And to be honest with you, one of the things that kind of kicked off this whole process was a white paper that they did maybe about 7 or 8 years ago called Regenerative Organic Agriculture, a down-to-earth approach to addressing climate change. So there they basically look at all the scientific data, and then they're able to actually quantify what each practice can do in terms of actually drawing down atmospheric carbon. So those are all things that I think are really, really critical to think about. It's, we're not just approaching this from kind of a, esoteric, this dislocated approach, but really there's hard science that goes behind basically each and every practice that we do.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. And then you had also shared the Climate Collaborative, which is climatecollaborative.com.
Yeah, so this is a great initiative that I'm really excited about. So, in the sort of, consumer product space, sometimes companies need a little bit of support and collaboration to make all of these steps toward being as responsible in the climate space as possible. So the Climate Collaborative is a coalition of companies that has come together to make commitments to actually improve their practices. And this includes everything from transportation, electricity at their facilities, supply chains, like we've been talking about, packaging, all of these different things. And so it's a way for companies to come together, share best practices and work together, and then be able to actually amplify these things. Because I don't think any one company alone can tackle all the things that we need to address. So I really like their approach, and they've got a great amount of resources out there for any company, big or small, that is getting involved. So if you have a company and you're looking to make improvements on all things climate, I would highly recommend them.
That's great. Thank you very much for that. And tell us about Grow Ahead, growahead.org.
Yeah, so Dr. Bronner supports a number of great causes, across the spectrum. And so of course regenerative agriculture is close to my heart, and this is one of the initiatives that we've been supporting the last couple of years. And one of the things that we've realized is that this notion of agroforestry, which is basically farming with trees in a way that is very diversified, not only is probably in my sort of, I would say biased opinion, but is a great way to supercharge carbon sequestration while also providing a great income for farmers. And so our goal is to be able to help small farmers all over the world invest in agroforestry systems so that they can, in fact, support their local food economies, but also sequester carbon and really kind of create these islands of knowledge, so to speak. And so for folks that would be interested in participating in crowdfunding, all of these replanting efforts all over the world, I highly recommend they take a look at growahead.org.
Okay, that's really wonderful. Thank you for that. And then the final resource that you shared with us on your list is a very recent article from Dr. Bronner's called Dr. Bronner's Supports the Green New Deal. And with everything happening, obviously this is a huge year in terms of policy, and COVID-19 has really amplified certain aspects of discussions that have already been underway. But this one seems to be so spot on in terms of linking a number of these different key efforts and initiatives. So Dr. Bronner supports the Green New Deal. Tell us, what does that mean, and why did you guys publish that?
Yeah, so for some of those history buffs out there might remember the history of the New Deal, which happened during the Roosevelt administration. And the idea was to put all of the resources of the federal government behind a recovery that would allow for folks to get out of the Great Depression through things like employment, public works, support for farmers, those types of things. And so the idea going forward is that really to be able to tackle the greatest existential challenge of our lifetime, which is climate change, we really need to be able to leverage all of the power that we have at the local, state, and federal level. And so there's been a number of activists and thinkers and authors, researchers that have been proposing this concept of a Green New Deal, which would basically focus a lot of the spending that we do at the federal level towards climate-friendly technology, investments, infrastructure, and those types of things. So what we want to do is make sure that any type of investment or stimulus package that comes out of this process not only is fair to everybody, especially those that were left behind in previous cases, but also includes green technology. So if we're going to actually build any transportation infrastructure, certainly we would want that to be low carbon or carbon neutral. I think the time is now that any type of investment should basically take into account all of the different sort of climate technologies we have, whether that's solar panels, et cetera. And so I think one of the things that we've realized is that what we want to do is try to replicate sort of the values and practices that we do at Dr. Bronner's. So for example, executive pay is capped at 5-to-1. So David Bronner can't make more than, 5 times what the lowest person pays. So really our goal is to make sure that we have living wages, universal health care for our staff. And we see that as absolutely critical, not just for our own team and our own company, but we want that for everybody. And really the only way to do that is to have a government program that allows for that and is as equitable as possible. And I would just say one sort of concrete way that I like to explain this is, one thing that you might realize going to the supermarket or your farmer's market, regenerative and organic products, they're more expensive for sure. And that's in part because we've actually incorporated the true cost. We're paying the farmer fairly. We are, making sure that he or she is rewarded for all of the investment that they're doing to make a regenerative organic product. And so for consumers to be able to actually pay a farmer the true cost, they need to be paid fairly as well. So that means raising the minimum wage. We want to have a living wage for everybody, so that way we can actually support this regenerative economy that we would like to see in the future.
Yeah, it's so important. And just to underscore the commitment that you all have already instituted at Dr. Bronner's, to have a 5-to-1 executive pay cap is extraordinary. We know in many of the corporations here in the United States, we've got executives getting paid 100, 200, 300 times what many of their employees are being paid. And in this case, the highest level executive is getting paid only 5 times what the rest of the team are getting paid.
Yeah, so that allows for us to pay living wages to everybody, whether you're starting off, even interns. We actually are able to provide, a living wage for interns, which is pretty unique. I mean,
Yeah.
I for one went into huge debt just trying to intern for, other nonprofits. And so for us to be able to do that, I think is a great example. And it just goes to show you, with this sort of commitment, you can actually do some pretty remarkable things. I hand it to the Bronner family for doing these things. They do fantastic work.
It reminds me of a wonderful quote that I've seen attributed to Gandhi that says, "The world has enough for everyone's need, but not for everyone's greed." And I think, what you guys are doing at Dr. Bronner's is such an exemplary example of what's possible, what needs to be done, what we should be supporting. And I want to thank you, Ryan, in the context of all of the disruption and disorientation that's happening right now with coronavirus. Thank you so much for taking time to visit with us. And before we sign off, I want to ask you if there's anything else you'd like to share with the audience in general. And on behalf of the audience, I'll thank you again.
Well, thank you, Aaron. I really appreciate the opportunity. I love all of the different activities that you all are doing, just between education and giving people this concrete things to do in their own, backyards. I mean, it's fantastic. So hats off to you all. I would say, as frightening as COVID-19 is, I also see it as a very unique, almost once in a lifetime opportunity for us to remake our world by creating those community connections, just rethinking what we want to prioritize. I live in Southern California. I work from home, and it's been, challenging indeed to be able to, sort of reorientate our lives to make sure that we are keeping ourselves and our communities safe from transmission of this disease. But also I've seen some pretty beautiful things in just the last, week or two that I'd like to see continue on once we resolve this. So I think this is a great opportunity for us to sort of, continue to build those communities and sort of take that momentum forward. So that way we can make sure that all of the values that we'd like to see come out of this sort of crisis are then, a little bit on solid footing. Let's not forget the lessons learned over the last couple of weeks, for sure.
Yeah, beautifully said. Yeah, thanks so much, Ryan. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. I appreciate it. Thank you.
The Y on Earth Community Stewardship and Sustainability podcast series is hosted by Aaron William Perry, author, thought leader, and executive consultant. The podcast and video recordings are made possible by the generous support of people like you. To sign up as a daily, weekly, or monthly supporter, please visit yonearth.org/support. Support packages start at just $1 per month. The podcast series is also sponsored by several corporate and organization sponsors. You can get discounts on their products and services using the code YONEARTH, all one word with a Y. These sponsors are listed on the whyonearth.org/support page. If you found this particular podcast episode especially insightful, informative, or inspiring, please pass it on and share it with a friend whom you think will also enjoy it. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for your support. And thank you for being a part of the Why on Earth community.